Support for this podcast and the following message come from Dignity Memorial. When your celebration of life is prepaid today, your family is protected tomorrow. Planning ahead is truly one of the best gifts you can give your family. For additional information, visit dignitymemorial.com.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. A warning to listeners, this segment contains mention of suicide. Now, I don't think you'd be surprised if I told you that I am addicted to TikTok. I'm sure it's bad for my sleep quality, but I am scrolling in bed every night. And when I saw that the House of Representatives passed a bill to potentially get it banned, I felt conflicted. And while we're not focusing on the ban today, some of the concerns are real, like privacy, addiction, the spread of misinformation. Still, there is one institution that thinks TikTok actually has potential to be a source of good in our world: Harvard. And to be specific, the Harvard Chan Center for Health Communication, which is run by Amanda Yarnell.
It has a really long history of building mass media campaigns to promote healthy behaviors.
The most famous campaign was around designated drivers in the 80s.
It was done in partnership with Hollywood studios and TV networks. But today, we're all watching TikTok and YouTube instead. And so I figured we needed new approaches and new coalitions with creators who are watched and trusted by millions on those platforms. And that's how the Creator Summit program was born.
The Harvard Creator Summit was a program for TikTok influencers who focus on mental health. At the summit, Harvard gave 25 hand-selected creators info packets on the latest mental health research and presentations from the researchers themselves, in the hopes that these TikTokers would share that information with their followers. One of those creators was Kate Spear.
Recovery is about building a life where our joy coexists with our work of managing mental illness.
Kate is not a doctor or a medical professional, but she makes videos about her own experience with serious mental illness, and she shares her knowledge, wisdom, and hope about it, too.
One of the greatest, I want to say, revelations in my recovery was this realization that feelings are not facts and thoughts are not facts.
I sat down with Kate, who started off as a mental health TikToker in Harvard's program, but was recently hired as a marketing director for the Harvard Chan Center for Health Communication. We discussed why it might be more strategic to work with platforms like TikTok than against them, and what it means for her to work within a mental health system that harmed her. Kate, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted.
So happy to have you. So happy to have you. Well, first of all, you got into mental health advocacy work because of your own journey. I know you've talked about it a lot, but can you say in your own words briefly, like what that journey looked like?
So I grew up as a zany kid, but basically the science had yet to catch up on the different presentations of both anxiety and ADHD in women.
I relate. I'm medicated for both.
Exactly. Yeah, same. But it took them 30 years to figure that out. So I spent about 20 years in the mental health care system, basically bouncing around with people not really knowing how to navigate my symptoms. When I was 18, I was actually misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder.
And that's like a completely different cocktail of pharmaceuticals. It's totally different.
Exactly. So I was prescribed, obviously, all of the polypharmacy that would traditionally help an individual who had bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. And it didn't exactly work so well. I ended up actually having a prolonged, and by that I mean a decade-long psychotic break. And only when I got a new doctor who really was kind of at the end of the ropes, they were planning to send me away to a residential long-term locked treatment program, did the new doctor say, actually, I fear this is all a misdiagnosis. I think really what we're dealing with is ADHD and anxiety, and now as a result of all of this medical trauma, PTSD. It was a journey. So yes, accurate that it was a journey.
It's really amazing that you have been able to get to a place where it seems like you have a lot more clarity and enjoyment in your life now, but also that you have shared your experiences and the things that you've been through. Talk to me about what it's been like to put your mental health struggles on social media and why you do it.
I would say I think it's important to anchor where I started my life and where I was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I couldn't leave my apartment without having a panic attack. And my body couldn't tolerate the world without being genuinely scared. Excuse my language. Although often the question is, why do you do this? This must be really hard for you, which undoubtedly it is. I think about what a privilege it is to have a platform. And when I started this, I didn't do it because it was fun. I did it because every night I went to bed and in my sleep, I'd have PTSD night terrors about losing friends to suicide. It was a way to pay it forward. I get totally annihilated sometimes when the algorithm serves up my content to a different audience that is nowhere near as kind as the community I know and cherish. But I don't do it for me. I do it for little me. I do it for the girl who couldn't walk outside.
I feel like there's been a lot of progress towards talking about mental health, and more people are doing mental health advocacy work. But I've heard that you differentiate between mental health advocacy and mental illness advocacy. I'm really curious to hear how you separate the two and why you think that's important.
I think the first thing to note is that every single person who is creating mental health content is doing it with the most incredible power to move the pendulum forward. I think their mental health content is phenomenal and it's serving people. And I think there's a difference between a mental health challenge and a mental illness. And a mental health challenge is something that impacts one's mental health. It is undeniably valid. Of course, I'm never here to diminish anyone's pain, truly. And it coexists with living a life. And mental illnesses disable one's ability to live a life. They often destroy it. That's the difference. The difference is that individuals normalizing this darkness, this level of debilitation, it's not, again, to get attention for pity. It's to normalize something that is not yet seen in the public eye and not yet recognized. And I just see where we are in the ecosystem as an opportunity, a launch pad for people who have been brave enough to talk about mental health to get even braver and talk about the really hard, darker parts of it. And I believe that's the mental illness component of the advocacy work.
So keeping all of that in mind, you have this new role at Harvard and you are both somebody who is working on this program, but also you are somebody who is also creating content. Like, talk to me about the Harvard Summit. What did the program look like for you and why did you want to do it?
To be honest, when I got the email, I thought I was being punked.
What? Why
I
punk?
just couldn't imagine Harvard inviting someone who is unabashedly a bit of a disaster on the internet. But basically, the Harvard Summit was originally devised as a field study to determine if building an alliance between kind of a STEAM faculty and creators could increase the amount of evidence-based information that was disseminated across social media. They basically picked out a slew of creators and they recruited us into these first online briefings that were hosted on Zoom. And basically we'd listen to these experts speak, we'd ask questions, and they would equip us with toolkits, which basically had all of the up-to-date science that could speak to the issues that a lot of us were trying to discuss, but perhaps not discussing it with as much scientific integrity as we could have. And what they found in just this preliminary study, just with these online briefings and these toolkits, was that it does in fact increase the amount of evidence-based information that's disseminated.
Wait, so what did that collaboration look like for you? Like, how did it influence the videos that you made?
Great question. I think the first thing is it definitely reframed my understanding of my responsibility. And so I think the briefings really helped me anchor into the understanding that so much of what I had been doing had the opportunity to help more people if I really dialed into science communication and the actual literature.
Coming up, why working with TikTok to spread good information could be more strategic than writing it off as a den of misinformation. Stick around.
The following message comes from NPR sponsor Sattva. Founder and CEO Ron Rudson is on a mission to bring quality sleep to more people.
Health and wellness are so tied to quality sleep. And I'm trying to tell everyone, look, you have to treat sleep like an activity because I believe sleep is the most important thing in your life.
To learn more, go to SAATVA.com/NPR.
This message is brought to you by Apple Pay. Who wants to fuss with inserting a card into a reader, or worse, into a skimmer, where your card information can be stolen? Instead, pay the Apple way. Apple Pay is easy, secure, and built into iPhone. All you have to do is set it up. Just add a card in the Wallet app and you're good to go. Support for NPR and the following message come from Indeed. You're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
From your car radio to your smart speaker, NPR meets you where you are in a lot of different ways. Now we're in your pocket. Download the NPR app today.
I imagine that there are going to be people listening to this conversation who are going to be like, perhaps skeptical, because there is, so much misinformation on TikTok, or perhaps they think that like TikTok is just a place where you go to watch videos of raccoons having a tea party, to watch something silly, or like to maybe see how to cook a cute recipe or something like that. I don't know. What might you say to those people who are skeptical because there's already just so much misinformation on TikTok and other social media?
Totally. I would say you're not wrong to be skeptical. I'm such a proponent for regulation, and we only can use what we have. And right now, the information states very clearly that more and more young people are getting their information from social media. And if that is the case, this is a chance to just improve the ecosystem. I'm not saying it's going to solve it, but it has an opportunity to help it. And I think when it comes to individuals with serious mental illness, they are structurally prohibited from so many spaces. And the online ecosystem is a place where they can find that community, where they can find solidarity. I just got a DM this morning saying that someone had watched every single one of my videos, and it was the reason they decided not to hurt themselves. And if we can just help one person, isn't that worth it?
What you've just said makes me think about, if this is where they're at, why not meet them there? Talk to me more about the phone itself and why it can be so key or so important to reach people there, especially when talking about mental health and mental illness.
Yeah, I think one of the things that surprised me the most about being in the psychiatric unit, what I realized as I had these conversations about people living in their car, people living under tarps, people from all walks of really hard lives, was that every single one of them, they all did have a phone. I will never forget the patient who said, "It keeps me human." Again, I'm not saying I want everyone glued to their devices all the time. Of course, that's not ideal for mental health or for navigating mental illness. And yet I think it's literally a medium to connection, a medium to staying attached to the real world. Or at least for me, when I used to leave it, it definitely grounded me.
That makes a lot of sense. So now you are at the center, in a way, of this collaboration between academics and TikTokers. I wonder, do you think that that kind of collaboration could be applicable to other fields?
Yeah, my hope really is that over the next few years that at the Center for Health Communications, we will be able to build a prototype of a program that will be replicable across all areas of science and research. And it's such an affordable and scalable framework. It involves faculty contributing an hour of their time, a Master's of Science student or whomever type of student within the discipline creating a toolkit and disseminating it to creators and influencers so that they can have a better understanding of the science and incorporate it in their content. And I think it could very easily be applicable to all sectors of health as well as environmental science.
I could see that.
I think one of the things that's been really interesting as I've begun working on this project, it's the reality that these faculty have poured their lives, their souls into research. And they have spent years and years fighting for funding, fighting for any type of way to learn this information. But only like a very tiny part of that process is it about how to get the science out to the people who pay for it in the first place, taxpayers. And that's what this is. It's saying media journalists have their role in disseminating this information and creators too. Imagine if every scientific lab or every, area of study was responsible for doing briefings that were readily available to individuals who have millions of followers that are very engaged, who have an appetite for that information.
Something else that I also have been thinking about is I imagine also being a person who interfaced with the psychiatric system. It ain't perfect.
Yes.
And there are a lot of things that the psychiatric system does and absolutely has done in the past that are actively harmful to people, even if the intent is good. What does that mean for you to have a seat at this table that perhaps you in the past would not have been invited to sit at, and so many other people whose struggles may feel familiar to you don't get to sit at that table either? What does that mean for you?
Having a seat at the table means progress. It means a level of acknowledgement I never even dreamt of. It's really hard to imagine what it's like to be treated like a specimen until you are treated like one. Unfortunately, because the system is so tapped, once you become what they call a frequent flyer, so you go in and out of the psych ward, in and out, they basically stop looking you in the eye. You stop being human. And I think it's how, honestly, I believe it's how the care teams stay doing their job, because they can't look you in the eye without their hearts breaking. It's how they find the stamina to get through the day in and day out. And I get that. And I've done extensive exposure therapy to talk with nurses and doctors who used to care for me. And that was them surviving. We're all just out here trying to survive. And I think having a seat at the table is us taking a brave step forward to tolerate the discomfort of something that's different, of something that makes us uncomfortable. And that's true progress. True progress is leaning in and saying, I don't know you. Teach me.
Well, Kate, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your time with us today.
It was such a privilege. So thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Kate Spear, marketing strategist at the Center for Health Communications at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. You can find her on TikTok. Coming up, the incredible life of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress, and how her identity influenced her political strategy. Stick around.
Listening to the news can feel like a journey. The 1A podcast is here to guide you beyond the headlines and to cut through the noise. Listen to 1A, where we celebrate your freedom to listen by getting to the heart of the story together. Only from NPR.
It's an election year, and a long one at that. So you're going to hear a lot of spin from the campaigns and their surrogates. Well, Here and Now Anytime is your source this election season for coverage that means something. Explore the issues, hear from voters, and find solutions on Here and Now Anytime, a podcast from NPR and WBUR.
On the TED Radio Hour, when a city wants to be more walkable, they call urban planner Jeff Speck.
Interestingly, I work in a lot of red cities, Grand Rapids, Oklahoma City, where the local business leaders are saying, geez, how can we become more walkable so that we become more desirable?
Ideas for a more walkable world. That's on the TED Radio Hour from NPR.
Climate change keeps a lot of us up at night. It's daunting to even think about, but every day people are taking steps, big and small, to do something about it. Listen to Here and Now Anytime, a podcast from NPR and WBUR. From the mountains of Puerto Rico to the Navajo Nation, hear stories of climate action on Here and Now Anytime.
In the wake of award season, there's been a lot of debate among Black film lovers like myself about which kinds of Black films tend to get made. Some folks say it's gang dramas, others say antebellum epics. And some people think there's too many films focusing on the upper middle class problems of upper middle class Black people. But there's one type of movie I think everyone in that conversation would agree we see a lot of: the Black history biopic. The past few years have given us films and miniseries about Bayard Rustin, Mamie Till, Harriet Tubman, MLK, Malcolm X, and Madam C.J. Walker. And that's an incomplete list. And overall, I think that's a good thing. It's great to elevate these legendary trailblazers. But sometimes in order to fit a storyline, these films leave out some of the most interesting parts of their subjects' lives. I felt that with the newest entry into this Black biopic cinematic universe, Shirley, a new Netflix film about Shirley Chisholm starring the incomparable Regina King.
Join me in an effort to regain our society as we go down the Chisholm Trail for 1972.
Shirley Chisholm had an incredible career. She was a champion for racial and gender equality. She was the first Black woman elected to Congress, where she served for 14 years and introduced more than 50 pieces of legislation. And not only was she the first woman to run for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination, but she was the first Black candidate for any major party nomination for president ever. What fascinates me and still feels very relevant to politics today is how her identity shaped her groundbreaking political career. To help lay that out, we've got Dr. Anastasia C. Curwood, chair of the History Department at University of Kentucky and author of Shirley Chisholm, champion of Black Feminist Power Politics. Dr. Curwood, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Our pleasure. So the woman of the hour right now is Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm is the subject of a new film on Netflix. And I wonder, what do you think makes her so compelling for this, history hero treatment that she's getting in this film?
Well, I can speak from personal experience. When I was a little girl, I saw a photograph of Shirley Chisholm. I thought she was my auntie because my auntie is a very snappy dresser, just like Shirley Chisholm. My parents said, nope, that's Shirley Chisholm. She ran for president. You could too.
I am not the candidate of any political bosses or fat cats or special interests. I am the candidate of the people of America.
I'd never forgot that. There is something about being in a group that has been so forcefully disempowered for centuries to then set your sights on the highest office in the land, to get to the national convention, to be on that national stage. She's kind of a superhero. And don't we love superhero movies?
It's obvious that her politics and her career kind of laid the foundations for some of the political ideologies that many people are still using and practicing today. In your book, you call her political approach Black Feminist Power Politics. And it's also in the title of your book. But in a few words, what are Black Feminist Power Politics?
So it's a blend of Black feminism, Black power, and then the world of electoral politics. She comes to it from her own person. She's growing up a Black woman. She sees doors closed to her because she's Black. She sees doors closed to her because she's a woman. So when you open up those two dimensions, you start to see how everything works together. So she found herself feeling connected to immigrants, Jews, young people, LGBTQ folks. anti-war protesters, because she came to anti-war through her understanding that it was taking away resources from people who really needed them. She could see all these different groups of folks who had been left out of the political process. And then she could see how all those people could come together with self-interest, a common self-interest that could put pressure on the political process and on politicians.
So it sounds like through her own intersectional identity and her understanding of that, she was able to coalition build across other intersectional identities of marginalized people and pull power from that and bring it to the electorate.
Yeah, exactly. I like to say she was practicing intersectionality before there was a term. It allowed her to meet people where they were and to really understand other folks' point of view, because she just wouldn't presume to know kind of what their interests were. She genuinely would want to find out.
Curiosity. It's like a totally different vantage point. Let's get a little deeper into the topic of Shirley's identity. One of the things that was fundamental to Shirley's political ideology was her Bayesian identity. She was born in Brooklyn, but for much of her young childhood, she lived with her maternal grandmother in Barbados while her parents were saving money and getting established in Brooklyn for her and her siblings. I wonder, how did her time in Barbados shape and influence how she viewed racism in America when she returned?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was hugely influential for her. I see it as coming down to two major things. The first one was her family, specifically her grandmother. She encouraged her to have her own thoughts, to know her own mind. The other piece was living in a majority Black society.
Yes.
Even in British colonialism, as it was, what she saw was Black people in power. In her school, the smartest kid in the class and the dumbest kid in the class were Black. So she could see, the whole spectrum of Blackness there. And she saw Black people in some positions of power. So when she came back, she had this context of self-determination, self-confidence, and she really questioned the present shape of American democracy. It was not just the Jim Crow South. It was Jim Crow America. It's the whole country. And she talked about it her whole life.
Those early years of my life on the island of Barbados gave to me the spunk that was necessary to challenge all of these age-old traditions.
Something else that I noticed, though, is that it's not like she was the only, Bayesian person to enter into Brooklyn politics. Talk to me about why Caribbean Americans were so politically active in New York, at the time of Shirley's birth, upbringing, and political rise.
Well, at the time she was born, this was a time of major migration of Caribbean people to the United States. We think about the Great Migration as southern U.S. to northern U.S., rural to urban. And then, of course, the later Great Migration is southern U.S. to western U.S.
Right.
But there's also, at the same time, there's this parallel Caribbean migration coming from the islands to the U.S. And Brooklyn was really, really the Mecca.
Yes.
So she is in this world of Caribbean people, but it's on American soil and responding to American political particularities like Jim Crow. But these are folks who are like, no, why shouldn't I run for office? This is also the moment in which Marcus Garvey is really ascendant in the United States. And people forget what a mass movement that was.
Right. I mean, Marcus Garvey, some people call him the father of Pan-Africanism, but this Jamaican man who was really preaching racial pride, independence, self-reliance.
We must inspire our literature and promulgate a doctrine of our own without any apologies to the powers that be.
In many ways, a lot of those ideals are building blocks for the Black Power movement,
Yes, absolutely. She went to rallies and meetings with her father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they would sit there and drink whiskey and just talk as people do. So she really learned at her daddy's knee. She learned politics there.
Touching on Shirley Chisholm's identity as a Black woman, she was very aware of the difficulties that she faced in politics, in the world, but especially in politics, as both a Black person and as a woman. As a politician, how did misogyny and racism together create obstacles to her doing her job?
She was taken for granted, especially on Capitol Hill. She's the only Black woman in Congress. And then in 1972, two other Black women join her, Barbara Jordan and Yvonne Brathwaite Burke. She was immediately compared to these women. So Barbara Jordan supposedly was smarter than Shirley Chisholm. And Yvonne Brathwaite Burke was prettier and nicer.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
But Chisholm said herself, like when she got to Capitol Hill, first of all, people looked at her like she was crazy or thought she was some sort of a freak.
For the first 2 to 3 months, I was miserable. And I always took the New York Times and read it while I was eating because nobody would sit by me.
So she felt very isolated initially as well because of her Blackness and womanness. So it was really important for her to kind of make coalitions, to make friends, find these points of interest with people, and then work together.
Talk to me about any moments that you can think of where Shirley perhaps felt that first and only status very intensely as a Black woman, whether she was among, Black men or white women.
I think of her as one of those poor big fish that you see in a restaurant in one of those tiny tanks. She has these skills. She has this temperament. And yet she's kind of boxed in. So the example that really tells you what you need to know is the 1972 Democratic National Convention.
NBC News reports the 1972 Democratic Convention.
She had a pretty, a decent coalition, but it's her last chance to try to get some of these people to come along. So first she goes to the Black Caucus. And she delivers a humdinger speech. She's got people all excited. But her fellow congressmen have basically turned their backs on her.
Nasty work.
Yeah. Okay, so then she goes to the Women's Caucus and she gives another humdinger speech. And it's the favorite speech of the day. So she leaves the stage and a reporter from the Boston Globe asks a bystander who's clapping madly, "Wow, what did you think? What did you think?" "Oh, she's great. She's great. But she's not going to win and I can't vote for her."
Whoa.
So then she says, "I'm clapping out the guilt."
I'm clapping out the guilt.
Yeah.
I'm clapping out the guilt.
This was printed in the Boston Globe in
July
1972.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's there's a lot being said with that feels like it could apply to so much of her career.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's such a wild illustration of people who are interested in her interests because they also are in their best interests. And yet she's still facing sort of like these dual betrayals to a certain degree. And it seems like that's a pattern that kind of follows throughout her career. But still, she found ways throughout her career, throughout her political career, to continue to amass power, flex her power, and coalition build. Thinking about today, who are some politicians that you see today practicing a similar kind of Black feminist power politics?
Well, I mean, you have to look first at Barbara Lee, who was a mentee of Shirley Chisholm. So Barbara Lee met Chisholm in 1972 as a campaign worker in California.
And she taught me that Black women can't go along to get along. These rules weren't made for us. So we must change these rules of the game so that we must address gender and racial equity at its core.
Congresswoman Lee is extraordinarily well-trained in coalition politics. The other kind of striking resemblance I see is, of course, Barack Obama.
That's interesting because I feel like his political record seems quite different than hers.
Well, where I see most of the similarity is bringing together a coalition to get elected.
It's the answer spoken by young and old, rich and poor, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, disabled, and not disabled.
Obama brought a lot of women together, especially after the convention, brought working class people together with well-educated people. He brought immigrants. So his voting coalition was really powerful. Now, Chisholm, she was an idealist. She was not a triangulator.
When you say triangulator, what do you mean by that?
What I mean is you kind of find, here's where I'd rather be on the left. Here's where the right-wingers are maybe going to come after me. So I'm going to pick a point somewhere, a third point where I can kind of hang out. And Democrats have been doing triangulation, I would argue, since Carter.
But you were saying that Shirley Chisholm was somebody who, unlike Obama, she didn't really deal too much in triangulation, is what you're saying.
No, what she did was she would find a point that was a point of agreement, of genuine agreement and self-interest. It's not like, oh, okay, well, I'll take it because it's not so bad. If you want what I want, let's press forward on this point together. So that's a very different thing from kind of trying to compromise. It's much more of a direct approach. Like, okay, look, you have a daughter. So you want her to have all the opportunities available to people's sons, right? You want her to be able to play the sports. You want her to not be sexually harassed. Why don't you vote for this Title IX provision of the Higher Education Amendments of 1972?
Yeah, I mean, which is a piece of legislation that very well changed education for generations of girls and women in this country.
Exactly. She identifies these points of overlap and she leans into those. It's a finely honed idea of what's right, what furthers democracy, what's best for the polity and the people in it.
See, I feel that, but the thing I feel like comes across in the Hollywood sort of narrative is there was a hardworking woman and she worked hard and things went well. And the end, you know what I mean? It feels like a simplification of her story and her qualifications. And I wonder, like, what are we missing about her legacy when we simplify it in that way?
We're missing what actually is the most interesting part about her, which is her humanity. She has been functioning as a symbol for decades. What people know about her, if they know about her, is that she ran for president. The film is not really showing people much beyond that she ran for president. But how it is that she came to be that person, this combination of her temperament and her personal history and her family history and her thinking and her education and her place where she's from, all of those things are at least as interesting, if not more interesting. But to get that, you have to be messy. And it's more radical to see her as human. Because if she's human and there are other humans who want to see change, they don't have to be heroes to get it done. Or they can see themselves as heroes even while they're still human, even while they're imperfect.
That is such a beautiful sentiment and so deeply moving. Dr. Curwood, thank you so much. This was great.
Oh, I had a great time. Thanks for talking to me.
That was Dr. Anastasia C. Curwood, author of Shirley Chisholm, champion of Black Feminist Power Politics.
Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany.
Hey, Brittany.
Hi, Brittany. It's Jordan from Detroit. I know you have a lot of feelings about Tyler Perry, and I'm wondering if you've seen his new film, Mea Culpa. And if so, what are your thoughts?
Jordan, thank you so much for calling in with this question. And from Detroit, no less. I always love to hear from people from my home state. Now, you got the right one today. You know that I watched Mea Culpa, Tyler Perry's newest film on Netflix. I have a complex relationship with him in that, like, it's like love, hate, love to hate. I think like many people, there is like a campy goodness to a lot of Tyler Perry films that I think many of us find irresistible. I mean, I watch Why Did I Get Married every single year just for the dinner scene alone. It's comedic genius, all right? So naturally, when I found out that Tyler Perry was finally moving into the realm of the erotic thriller, which I love, with his newest movie, Mea Culpa, on Netflix, me and my husband, of course, were going to sit down and watch it opening night. I mean, it's starring Kelly Rowland and Trevante Rhodes. There was a lot, I think, that felt promising about this film. Whether it was going to be good or campy, I knew I was going to have a good time looking at some gorgeous people. And I'll say, in a way, that is what I experienced. but also the nonsense, the level of nonsense that permeated the screen. It was really something to behold. I mean, for starters, this is a movie called Mea Culpa. Mea Culpa is a Latin legal term. The main character of the film, played by Kelly Rowland, is a lawyer named Mia. This is what we're working with when we're talking about Mea Culpa, okay? So she ends up in this situation where she's at odds with her husband and his family, her in-laws, because she takes on a case defending a famous local artist who's been accused of murder. She falls in love with the artist. She cheats on her husband. I mean, it's Trevante Rhodes. How can you not fall in love? I get it. But the way in which some of these love stories and relationships are depicted, Tyler Perry gave me a lot to scratch my head over. One of the things that he's kind of known for in a lot of his films is putting the women that he puts on screen through some really harrowing circumstances. They will get slapped around by their partners, called all types of anything but a child of God. It's always a spectacle with the disrespect for the women in these Tyler Perry films. I think the best of our erotic thrillers often communicate some sort of fear or anxiety that people have culturally. And so I found myself looking at Mea Culpa, wondering, what is it about a woman choosing to leave a bad relationship that seems so scary to him? Why does she have to get beaten and dragged and punished for getting out of a bad relationship and possibly into a better one? But after watching Mea Culpa, the big question in my mind is, what's so scary to Tyler Perry about a woman who just wants to enjoy herself without being hurt? Well, anyway, Jordan, thank you so much for calling in with this question. As much as I hate to admit it, Tyler Perry does have some kind of grip on me. At the very least, these movies are some of the best camp I think that we have in the history of American cinema. So as much as he irritates me sometimes with the things that he shows on screen, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't ready for another Tyler Perry erotic thriller. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Barton Girdwood,
Alexis Williams,
Liam McBain,
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Jessica Placzek.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
On the next All Songs Considered from NPR Music, we play and guide you through songs to slow the blood and calm your nerves.
My stress level on a scale of 1 to 10 has been at an 11.
Look for All Songs Considered every Tuesday, wherever you get podcasts.
We know you care about what you watch, what you read, and what you listen to. NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast is with you 4 days a week to make sure that time is well spent. The latest, greatest shows, books, music, and movies, it's all on the Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast from NPR. Listen tonight.
We all hear things differently, and that can be tough when there's so much noise. This election year, we're a space to speak up and to listen. Listen to 1A for the latest on election 2024, only from NPR.